Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be building and tuning arrows for my ILF recurve bow. This bow is dedicated specifically to hunting. It's about 50 pounds at my draw length, and I need to get a new set of arrows built up for it. I recently bought half a dozen shafts, and we're going to take them from this, a plain carbon shaft, and we're going to turn them into something like this. This shaft is currently 32 inches from the end of the carbon to the end of the carbon. These half-out inserts add about a ½ inch to the end of the arrow, and you're looking at almost a ½ inch being added to the back of the arrow when you put the nocks in. So altogether, this arrow is going to come out to close to 33 inches once all the components are installed and put together. Now if I were to take this out, fletch it, and shoot it on that bow, it won't be tuned. At some point in our archery careers, we've all seen an arrow that just will not fly right. The reason that arrow is not flying right could be due to your form. It could also be due to being improperly tuned. With traditional archery, you can tune the bow to the arrow to a certain extent, but you have much more freedom in tuning if you tune the arrow to your bow. I chose to run a 300 spine and keep it long to help me in gap shooting. I'm not a truly instinctive archer. Gap shooting is the method of using the point of your arrow to sight in on your target. As you shoot at different distances, you learn how much gap to put between the point of that arrow and your target. Eventually in gap shooting, you'll reach a distance where the point of your arrow is sitting exactly on top of your target. This is called your point on distance. My hope in building these arrows long is to make my point on distance as close to 20 yards as possible. When these arrows are finished, I'm also going to index my broadhead so that when I cant my bow, the broadhead is perfectly vertical, and I use the tip of the top blade as my sighting picture. First things first, I'm going to set this arrow up and show you guys the reaction I get as I take a few shots here into the shed, into my hay bale target behind me. These are 50 grain inserts. I like to spin the arrow as I put the insert in to make sure that glue goes all the way around the inside of that shaft, and then press firmly as it dries. I'll use a little piece of paper towel to wipe up the excess glue. And now you've glued in the front of your insert. Next, I'll take one of these nocks and put it in the back end of the arrow. I also like to twist these in on the end of the arrow as well. Sometimes these nocks come with small ridges to get a tight fit, and if you twist the arrow as you insert the nock, you'll meet a little less resistance. So now that we have a full-length carbon arrow with a nock on one end and an insert on the other, I'm going to screw in my desired head weight, which is 200 grains. I'm going to show you guys the reaction we get in my compressed hay bale inside the shed shooting from about 10 yards. Now as you can see, the nock is pointing to the left while the point impacted to the right. I want a perfectly straight impact so that I can watch that arrow fly straight away and into the target even without fletchings. In order to fix this, I'm going to begin trimming the back end of this arrow at about ½ inch increments until I start to see the arrow shaft straighten out a little bit, and then I'm going to come down to about 1/8 of an inch to make sure that I tune this in perfectly and don't remove too much arrow, where I'll begin to get the opposite reaction, a stiff reaction. This is the point of Bareshaft tuning, to get the arrow to leave the bow as straight and correctly as possible, so your fletchings on the back end have to do as little work as possible to correct arrow flight. Now I'm going to start trimming this arrow in ½ inch increments until I see it starting to straighten out in flight. You may have to take 2, 3, or even 4 inches off the end of your arrow depending on your draw length and your spine and what your bow's weight is. You can continue to make these adjustments on your own and figure out your system. If you have a professional arrow saw, it's going to be a lot easier for you. Now this is not a high performance saw, so as I'm cutting through the carbon, I'm going to go very slowly. I'm going to rotate the carbon as well to make sure I get a square cut and don't just chop right through and induce an angle which will impact how the nock sits in the end of the arrow. Now I'm going to take an arrow squaring tool and remove the burr off the end of that carbon. Now I can put my nock back in the end of the arrow and go take another shot. Now it's important to note that you want to do this either indoors or on a calm day, because any wind, especially a crosswind, will affect how this arrow shaft is reacting in flight without fletchings. Now this reaction is definitely not where we want it, but it is a lot better than where it was. So we're going to go ahead and take another 1/2 inch off the end of this arrow and see how close we can get. And now we're just going to rinse and repeat that process until we get perfect arrow flight. Now that shot looked really good. I know I'm getting really close to where this arrow needs to be tuned at. So to make sure I don't make a mistake, once I start getting good arrow flight, I'm going to shoot this several times and see if I can get consistency as well. It's important to remember two things when you get to this stage of the process. One, you're not perfect. Your release is not going to be perfect every time, and that will impact the reaction of your arrow. The second is there is such a thing as good enough. At this point in my process, I'm willing to cut an 1/8 inch off the end of this arrow and check flight again. I'm going to take a fletched arrow that'll give me perfect flight and compare it to the Bareshaft at this point. Now it's at this point that I have to get really honest with myself. While I was shooting, I actually took several shots off camera, and I got reactions that were both weak and stiff, with a couple that were perfect dead down the center. This is the last shot that I took, and it's actually slightly weak. Adding a little weight, like an arrow wrap or fletching on the back, will stiffen the arrow. And after this process, the fletchings are going to cover up any errors that I might have in form or release, and it's going to correct arrow flight when I put broadheads on the end of these arrows. Now I'll take you guys in the house and show you how I wrap and fletch these arrows before stashing them in the quiver. Now that we have our arrows tuned, we're going to put wraps on them, fletching on them, and go outside and take a few shots. While you're putting these wraps on, you're going to want some type of a semi-soft pad to press down into to get full contact with the vinyl wrap. In this case, I'm using our dish drying pad right here on top of the counter, but if you have a mouse pad, that works as well. Once you get the vinyl wrap down on your pad, back the arrow into it, press down, and begin to roll. Once you've done that, just repeat for the rest of your arrows. Now I have all my wraps in place and we can get ready to start fletching. You don't want to touch these wraps at this point. You want to keep any kind of oil or grease off your fingers off of that wrap so that the super glue is able to adhere to it perfectly. Now the feathers that I'm going to be using are these Gateway batwing feathers. These are 3.5 inches. Each one weighs about 2.5 grains, and they're extremely effective, but really I just like the way they look. They add a little bit of flair to your arrow setup, and they're not your traditional parabolic or shield cuts. I'm going to use this Loctite super glue. This is the professional liquid style, not the gel. The gel works just as well as this does. I found this actually maybe takes a couple more seconds to set up, but it works well. I just run a thin bead down the quill of the arrow. Try not to run off the sides with your glue. You don't want to stick the feather to your jig. and then just press it down evenly right against the side of the shaft and hold for about 20 seconds. I like to push down on one end and then the other to see if I'm still getting any lift off the shaft, to make sure everything's glued down properly, and then go ahead to the next one. And there you have it, perfectly fletched. Alright, let's take a few shots with these new arrows. I have a broadhead in here, a 200 grain, and then I have 3 field points. I haven't shot this yet at 20 yards, so we're going to see what it looks like. We'll start with a broadhead. Man, that dropped right into my target. That was absolutely perfect at 20 yards. Like I said before, I indexed that blade so it's vertical as I can't, and I used the top of that top blade, the very point of that top blade, as kind of like the front sight on the end of a shotgun rib. Let's see what it looks like with a field tip. Alright guys, believe it or not, that's the first 2 shots. First being a broadhead and the second being a field point with these new arrows we made today. Hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something, and hope it gives you guys a little confidence to work on your own setups as well. So as always guys, thanks for watching. I appreciate your time, and God bless.